Hey, this is Matt from Gravity Cast Games, and I'm here to do some drawing for an upcoming game that I'm working on. And I have some characters that I'd like to take you to look at and see what you guys want to do with these. I have three that are currently up here right now, and give me some feedback in the chat to see which ones that you'd like me to work on today. I have number one is Rao Magwan. He is a big cat guy that's a fighter. We could work on him. I also have Folly the Trail Master. She makes maps with her father. She's an interesting character. And then I also have Alexia the Physician, which is kind of timely considering the circumstances. So let me know what you guys think. Well, we have one vote for cat person. Oh, it says we have a sync problem, huh? Seems good now? Cool. Well, what's your vote there, Abstractism? Here's some of the characters I've currently made. As you can see, I have one of the cat people already, so that would be similar to some of the guys that would be made. Yeah, I can go over those. So the first one here is Raw Magwan. He's one of the cat people fighters. The one here in the middle is Folly the Trail Master. She helps make maps. That's this one here. And then Alexia the Physician over here on the last one. Yep, Explorer, yep, for the middle one, and the third one is a healer. Red Fox says, vote for the cat person. I think that's, what do you say there, Abstractism? Last chance. We got, I think, two. Most people are voting for the cat people, it looks like, so we might have to go with that. Obviously, I'm going to do all these eventually, so. As you can see with the rest of these heroes, I already have kind of an established style for the world, so. And I borrowed a lot of that style from the original Dragon Ball Akira Toriyama style. I thought really fit this pretty well. So that's going to basically consist of very clean lines. You can see with the heroes here, very thin, dark lines for the heroes. And then also very thick, solid shapes. And then also a color palette to match. So very bright color palette. So the big things that we're going to worry about are some of the shapes to make sure that they're in order for the style, because we're just doing some concept art right now. So with all those things in mind, I'll go ahead and get started on some concepts. And I'm going to keep his card up here. Oops. So we have a reference. So whenever I'm doing a character design like this, we know this guy, and I'm just going to make some notes up here. We know he's a Fenral, which is a cat person in this particular world. And if I read his card here, he says, no man or beast has bested my twin blades. So I know that he's got two swords. And what are some other things that we can do with this guy? What kind of cat should we be going after here? Because we got some options. Just setting up some layers right now so I can get started. So like I said, I kind of have an established style for this already. Take a look at some of these other heroes that are designed. You can see a lot of their shapes here. Um, whoops, wrong layer there. A lot of the shapes here are very large, thick shapes. You can see they're very full shapes, lots of rounds. So I'm going to make sure I'm being consistent with that style when I'm doing this. And if this guy's carrying around 2 swords, then he's probably maybe kind of angry. So we're going to have some nice full shapes here, some nice rounds to match the style, but we're also probably going to have some nice points in there somewhere. Viku says maybe Siamese cat for this. We might be able to do that. So right now I'm just going to throw some things together here. Just do some really, really rough sketches of some posing. And since this guy is kind of a fighter, we're going to give him kind of a crouching pose. Surprised nobody said tiger, right? Since that seems to be the thing right now. That's right, Carol Baskin. So I'm just still roughing out some shapes here to figure out what's going to be some good poses for this guy. If you guys have any questions or want to see anything on this, don't hesitate to ask if you have questions about the artwork in general. If you have questions about the game world, what kind of tools I'm using, feel free to reach out and ask whatever you want. Biku in the Discord channel is asking about what drawing tools are using. Um, yeah, it's Photoshop, obviously, like you said. But the tablet is a Huion Canvas Pro GT20, so 20-inch, which I found is way more reasonable than a Wacom tablet for sure. And seems to be doing a pretty good job. It's the first time I've actually used it for a larger project like this, but it seems to be doing a pretty good job. Make my notes a little smaller there. Oh, you're still on a Wacom bamboo, huh? Well, hey, they still work, so I guess I said Wacom. It actually is Wacom, but that sounds so stupid. I just can't do it. So what made me choose this tablet? Well, I did a little bit of research. There's not a lot of competitors out there, honestly. There's maybe three. Wacom is one of them. Huion and uh, something GT Pen or something like that. There's one. Huion and the Pen one, whatever that's called, they're about the same price. And the Wacom is like way more expensive. And this one, it seemed to have a lot of features like a laminated screen. So when you draw on it, it doesn't feel like you're drawing like an inch away from what you're actually drawing on, because some of the older ones and some of the cheaper ones, it's a lot harder to know where you're actually putting the pen tip. It doesn't line up with where you actually draw, but so this feels more like an iPad Pro, which is what I was used to. I have one of those for work, and it has a laminated screen, so it feels like your drawing tip actually is putting, um, you're actually drawing right where the tip is. Where some of the older ones that they don't work like that. So now I got some basic shapes in here. I'm starting to put some of the forms in here to give this a little more 3D look. Now, if you did notice, I actually already have one of the cat people in here, the Finral characters. The Finral is just a cat race, nothing super fancy there. Let's see, let me get those guys turned on. So you can see this guy here. His name's Darkleaf. He's one of the other Finral characters that come from the same kind of place in the world. So he also has twin swords. He's kind of like the same, from the same race and also from the same culture. But the guy that I'm making currently isn't associated in the same way as this guy. So I have a little more freedom to do some crazier stuff with him. And also, Raoul is also one of the biggest heroes that you can get in the game to start from a fighting standpoint. So I want to make sure. See these Dark Leaf's um, weapons there are pretty small, pretty simple, not a lot of detail. But being that this guy that we're working on now has a lot more fighting power, he needs to be a little fancier. So we got the basic shape down for these. So I'm going to make sure that when I'm doing stuff for the weapons that I make them a little bit bigger and also probably a little fancier. And I think I'm also probably going to keep these a little more curved because I kind of based the Finro race a little bit on kind of Asian culture, a little bit. So these can be somewhat more like a mix between a katana and a broadsword, something that's pretty thick. Dual wielding two-handed swords. I don't know if they're going to be quite that big. Yeah, he probably could handle two-handed swords, but they're more about I think speed than outright brute force. Like if you saw that other guy that was down here as an example. So Garok the Crusher, he's more about brute force there. He's a pretty big dude. So we're going for probably a little more agility, but still needs to look pretty big. So I do have a couple things up here, and I can get your guys' feedback. Probably do need one more element here because we know he's a Fenro. He's got two swords, but I need something else because angry is probably not a good enough descriptor for what we would want to do with him. We need the general rule when I'm doing character designs is I typically like to have three distinguishing features for the character. And you know, Darkleaf is also a Fenro with two swords. And then I do need some other kind of distinguishing feature for this particular character. So if anybody has some ideas, I can try a few things out. It looks like Ashley's asking what inspired the cat race. Why did I choose cats as opposed to other animals? That's a good question. Some of this stuff is inspired a little bit by Akira Toriyama's stuff, Dragon Ball, and some of the old school Dragon Quest games. So they had some cat people in there that I thought looked kind of cool. And it did fit this a little bit. Like the Fenrir race are kind of a mix between Asian culture and like jungle dwellers kind of thing. So I figured like cats are a really good mix for that. And I thought that was kind of an interesting way to express that kind of culture. About scimitars, huh? Yeah, we might be able to do something like that. What about the rest of the character? Anything? If I'm a giant cat and the best warrior in the world, what would be something that I would carry around? Something interesting. We want to try to add some story to this guy, you know, like what something interesting that he would carry around that would give this guy a backstory, you know, like that's kind of things that I like to think about when I'm doing a character like this that would make him interesting. And it also makes the characters a little less, you know, one dimensional. If it's just a big cat with some swords, you know, like he's just about beating things up. But if it's a big cat with swords and he's carrying around something interesting, you know, that's a little off, but, you know, you could maybe place it. Yeah, maybe ancient Egyptian, something from that branch. Oh, so we're going like Middle Eastern genie stuff, huh? Lamp. Yeah, I haven't really developed the culture a lot as far as what actually happens in here. So, yeah, I'd take all these ideas into consideration and kind of build on them. Could have a fossil or an artifact just for some reason or another. Yeah, these guys are kind of a warrior class thing, how I envisioned that. So it was kind of almost like jungle samurais or something. I mean, maybe we can do some kind of, we can give this guy some kind of medallion. Hey there, Van Fay. How's it going? So we'll throw the medallion down here. Yeah, it could be a reminder of what to fight for. Could be lots of things that we could do. That could be his, like his seal for his, samurai team or whatever. Yeah, that could be cool. Trying to get the angle right on this medallion so it, whoop. Just cleaning up some of the line work here. Any drawing tips when it comes to creating characters? Yeah, I'm kind of working on that right now. That's kind of why I'm asking these questions. It's always a good thing to have in mind. So I have those notes up here going on. So 3 distinguishing features for a character that always um, help tell their story a little bit better. So we know this guy is a Fenrol, or a cat person. And then we also know that he's going to have 2 swords. In this case, we got like big scimitar type of things. And the other thing that we found out here is he's got a medallion to remind him of what he's fighting for. So and I can't spell medallion, but that's okay. I can draw pretty pictures, so. So I've noticed that when I try to do that and be intentional about doing those kind of 3 key points for a character, it's going to differentiate it from another character, even if it's the same type. Like if I have another cat person, as long as I'm being intentional about a few details. And in this case, we have the Fenrir with 2 swords and the medallion. And actually, Biku recommended maybe that we try a Siamese cat. So there would be 4 points that would make this character distinguished from, especially the other cat character that I have currently developed. The other cat was actually inspired by Heathcliff. So if you guys remember that cartoon back in the day. At least his orangeness was. So here's where I can always recommend that you never ever draw from memory when you can get away with it, especially when you're going from a specific type of character. In this case, I know the general style, so I don't have a problem doing this kind of stuff, and I'm making up some of these swords as I go along, which is fine. But now that we have a specific target in mind, like a Siamese cat that has its own set of distinctive characteristics, I never want to just make that up. So, yeah, he does have 2 points. So, 2-pointed swords, so he would be Siamese anyway. Puns are funny. So now that I know that he's going to be Siamese, what I'm going to do is go do just a really quick set of research here. Do some Google searches for what's going to make a Siamese cat a Siamese cat. So just with a quick search there, I'm going to go ahead and add those kind of things. So I have my list of this particular character, but you know, so under Siamese here, I would want to have, he's going to have blue eyes, which I'm not really worried about at this stage because I'm not doing color. I'm just doing kind of shapes. So the other thing that I'm going to worry about here is the darkened part of the face. So let me bring over an image here just so you guys can see what I'm looking at. So I kind of have to do my own kind of analysis on what makes a Siamese cat a Siamese cat. What's the themes here that I can pull out I've actually never used Clip Studio before. I have heard about it. I mostly draw in Procreate on an iPad, and then also a lot in Photoshop. And I do a little bit of Blender stuff too. I got into 3D sculpting that I've been messing around with now that I got this tablet. So with the Siamese stuff here, we got the blue eyes. We got that dark face there. And I have noticed that their ears are kind of a little bit more pointed up and they're a little bit larger. So I want to make sure that I get those three things in there. So like that color pattern, I guess in general. So darker face and tail. I'm kind of running out of space there, but that's all right. I can shrink those down with the magic of Photoshop here. Except I put the rest of those on the wrong layer. That's all right. So I can get rid of the Siamese cat there. And I'll go ahead and make sure that I add those features in. So I want to mess with the ears a little bit more, I think. I see what I did. Let's get my layers in order here. There we go. So I'm going to make sure I keep all that stuff in mind. Like I said, I'm just doing shapes right now, so I don't necessarily need to do a whole lot with the colors, but I do need to account for those shapes. So when I'm thinking about this and how to approach these actually look like the wrong ears if I'm going to be doing Siamese cat. Most of the references that I saw, they're going to have ears on the top that are a little higher and a little bigger in proportion to the head versus the cat ears that I have now, which are kind of smaller and pointier. And then I also need to make sure that I have that shape. So all this being the dark area around here. So I need to make sure that I'm covering those shapes that are happening. So that will also help build that case for this being a Siamese cat versus some other cat. And then also, I don't have a tail visible here yet, but I can add that in as well. So I'm going to go ahead and this is exactly why you never draw from memory. Because even if you have a Siamese cat at home and you look at it every day, it's those kind of details that your brain just loses. So you have to remind yourself all the time because what your brain does is overly simplify things and you miss out on a lot of details. So I'm going to do bigger ears. And again, I'm going to do from reference here. So I have one hero made already. So I have Dark Leaf's character So I want to make sure that I'm matching similar styles here for the nose, since I've already kind of established some general looks for how a cat works in this world. So I'm going to make sure like the eyes match, the nose matches, so I'm not reinventing that. So you can see very simple, just simple eye there. I know he's got an eye patch on one eye, but I can see the other one. So I'm going to just make sure I'm consistent with how I'm representing that, and just keep the patterns of the Siamese cat, change up the ears a little bit. Typical amount of time I spend on a character, I would say it really depends. Obviously, I'm walking through this one a little bit more than I typically would, but I would say usually start to finish. For example, I can actually talk about this. Here is Braxos. This was a character that I just posted on Instagram not too long ago. So this is Braxos the Invincible. And I think I sat down and did his concept art in about an hour, and probably a little over an hour did all the coloring and everything. So he actually looked nothing like this when I got started. So let's take a look at his. Whoops. I'm trying to erase the folder. That's not going to work. So these are going to be kind of light. Let me see if I can darken this up a little bit. Yeah, so you can see he actually started something like this. Completely different pose, but it was kind of the same thing. I came up with a theme for Braxos. He needed to be very huge. He's actually one of the biggest defense heroes, so he needed to be really solid, really thick. But I also kind of want to make him kind of a little bit arrogant and almost full of himself. So I kind of gave him this, fancy boy hair. So, he was kind of flexing. So that was kind of one of the ways that I wanted to show those. So he evolved a little bit. So then I drew him with some armor. I knew that that was one of his distinguishing features. He was kind of a pretty boy. He was huge, and he had this big set of armor that really made him stand out from everyone else. So then I changed up the pose a little bit, like he was really cheesing it up in his suit of armor. But I also know that this guy, he needed some kind of fantasy weapon, so this kind of wasn't cutting it. So I needed to pose him in a different way. So I just kind of posed him, made him a little more innocent looking, I guess, and then also added a weapon for him. So he's kind of coming up over the hill here and carrying this big war hammer, still donning his suit. So that was kind of the evolution of this character. So like he had his 3 or 4 distinguishing features, and then I also added this giant hammer that has a lot of ornate detail on it that matches his armor, that's very specific to him. And then that's pretty much what made Braxos. And then that turned into the final art there. So you can see it was a pretty close match. I did clean up the hammer a little bit more and tightened that up so the lengths matched and things like that. But that was a general process for what we're going through right now. So start to finish for him was probably about 2.5 hours. And sometimes I list these out manually, like those things that we were doing for Rawl here, our warrior cat. Like the Fenrir 2 swords, medallion, and Siamese. Sometimes I list them out like that. Sometimes I just have in my head. Sometimes, like with Braxos, I was kind of feeling it as I was going along to see, okay, what makes sense for this guy? What would make him cool? What would this big dude be carrying? It's got to be something huge and ridiculous that nobody else could hold. Still not cutting it because it deals smashing, not slashing damage. Yeah, yep, some D&D jokes there. I'm sure it's 2d20 of bludgeoning damage, though. Great against skeletons, I hear. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start cleaning some of this stuff up here by the face. Make sure that I'm working in some of those shapes. Right now I'm making sure that I'm keeping my 3D forms in here so this feels like a 3D shape and not just something 2D and flat. So just like the other guy, we got a little triangle nose. Oh, that's all right. Bad jokes are welcome. You'll probably hear a lot of dad jokes if you hang around, so. So I want to make sure that I keep that shape in here. So these ears are going to be a little on the darker side. And then also I want to bring back my reference to make sure that I'm doing this the right way and I'm putting those basic shapes in there the right way. Just need to look at the head here. Let's mask some of that out so I don't have to look at it. What resources do I recommend for people with trouble drawing in different perspectives? Perspective is tough. I actually gained a lot of my drawing ability because I do a lot of 3D. That's what I got my degree in. And some of you may know I was a college instructor for a while and taught 3D graphics and animation. That actually was a very big help. Spatial relation skills are a very big help to that stuff. So, but the easiest thing that you can learn is that all of these shapes that I'm making here are broken down into boxes, spheres, and cylinders. Those are the basic shapes for everything. And those three things are always very easy to put into perspective. And then you can make it more complicated from there. So that's how I'm going to end up going back and fixing a lot of these. And you can kind of see that I'm doing that already, is that I'm actually just making a bunch of simple shapes. If I do kind of a paint over on some of these, I'm going to grab a really yeah, I guess you were one of my former students, right? You did pass. So the leg here is essentially just a cylinder in three-dimensional space, and we have another cylinder. They taper slightly, and in the center they actually meet with a sphere. So, and all of the same things here. Like I can tell my sword is actually not very done very well in perspective, which is fine. I can go back and fix that before I put some final lines down. Because if I'm following the line here, it is actually going this way. So like this would be going that direction a little bit more, and I'm not really following it that well. So I would have to change a few of my lines around. But a very, very good trick in order to get perspective down, especially when you're doing just localized perspective like here. I'm not putting this character in a scene. That becomes a little bit harder to work with. But when I'm dealing with just relative perspective, like within its own character, I don't really need to worry a ton about vanishing lines and all that other stuff. I just need to make the lines consistent. And a lot of the style that I'm borrowing this from, like the old Dragon Ball style and all that stuff, there wasn't a ton of perspective in a lot of those. Everything was kind of almost an orthographic view, which basically means there's not a ton of perspective. All the lines are actually parallel. So like this here is not going towards or away necessarily. This whole shape for the sword can be broken down into just basically planes. So if I were to make this sword here, if I were to fix this sword, actually, I should say, because it's not looking so hot right now. That'd be one of the first things that I would do, is I would establish the overall planes of how these are going to go. So the top and bottom of this plane would be parallel to each other. And then it'd be something like that. And then within the whole width of this shape, I know like that plane works in perspective with itself. So then I know like on this flat plane within it, this actually would go back to the tip, I guess, here. So within that plane, I would do that. So then I can kind of gauge like, okay, here is a gap. I would try to measure that same kind of gap between the top here, and then I would figure out where the point hits, which is actually in the very tip here. So then I'm just going to kind of draw that kind of squished. I see where those contact points would land and where major points would go on that squished perspective. And that's kind of where these would end up then. And that way I do a lot better job of making this in perspective. So that actually fixes a lot of the bad perspective that I had on there. But you can see, like everything else on this guy, this is just a bunch of spheres, right, that are kind of sitting on top of each other in space. So yeah, where the shoulders are, spheres, cylinders. So it's actually what I was doing was just roughing out basic shapes first, like lines, like where do I want this guy? Um, and then just going through and doing basic perspective like that. So after I did this, obviously you can see how bad that sword was in my original first pass there. I know these were supposed to be kind of curved a little bit, but that's obviously kind of like melting. So that's one thing that I would definitely fix before I would go into doing the actual line work for this. Which I can probably get started on here pretty soon once I do fix that. I do need to come up with some other details, like what's on this medallion. We had some people that were talking about potentially Egyptian things like that, so I can put something of like maybe like a beetle on there that maybe represents his master or something that taught him how to be a warrior. So also, here's a very good perspective trick. I'm going to redraw this real quick, this medallion, just so you can see this happen. So an easy way to do perspective for this medallion is make it a box. This is how you can easily make circles in perspective. So if I want this medallion here, I won't even make it round. What I'll do is make it square. And I'll make the edges just for some basic perspective. Remember, this is not 100% accurate, but if you're doing local perspective where you're not comparing it to anything else in a larger scene, or you're not doing any crazy camera angles, you can really get away with this kind of stuff. So you have these lines that are always parallel to each other, and these can be skewed as much as you want. So if I were to really skew these, I could do that as well. So I could make whatever angle that I want, as long as the opposing parallel lines are parallel, then we can get away with whatever you want. So then here, where the hook would be here in the middle. So what I'm going to do is just cut this in half both ways. And then you just draw an arc between these, and then that you always have a perspective. You can basically, you're doing a circle in perspective then, and it is really, really close. So no matter what you do on that, no matter how crazy that gets, so center points connect on both, and if you connect those with arcs, you get something that's really close to an arc in perspective, and it ends up looking not too bad. Just getting kind of sloppy with my lines there. They're just a little bit thick, but that's maybe not. So then you can always add thickness. So I'm going to be doing something like that to this one here. So he's got a lot bigger of a medallion. I'm going to get rid of some of these lines here that I don't need now. Those were the build lines. Let's get rid of some of those. And I'm just tracing around the inside to give this a little bit of depth. Well, I'm glad that helped you out. Yeah, that's a trick that I learned. Well, because the nice thing about that is if you can do that with a just a simple circle. You can then also do that exact same thing with a cylinder, because if you can make a cylinder in perspective like that, right, you basically can just extend that down and take that same arc here and do it down here. Now you have a cylinder in perspective. So no matter what you're doing, you can kind of get that same angle on it. So if you can do a circle, you can do a cylinder. Spheres are easy because they're always a circle. The trick one sometimes is boxes. If you're doing multiple points of perspective, but if you're not doing multiple points, that method that I just showed you was pretty easy. Just do the parallel line trick for most of the stuff. As long as it's stylized, you're probably going to be fine. Yeah, so as long as these lines, opposing lines, are always perpendicular, and you just follow that. So these are perpendicular, perpendicular, or excuse me, parallel. I'm saying the wrong ones. Then it ends up, no matter what shape you do, so these parallel, the boxes probably won't make it onto the final art. So let's get rid of those. Let's see here. Let's get back to this guy because we got a little less than an hour left here, so I want to make sure I get this guy inked in. So I want to make sure I finish up his medallion here. Now this is going to be pretty small, so I'm not going to put a ton of detail into this, but and this is going to be more of an icon, I think, probably than something that's super photorealistic. So I think what I'm going to do here is so the other thing that I'm going to do is, I'm not real sure how those Egyptian beetles are supposed to look. So again, I probably shouldn't be drawing this from memory because I only kind of remember, and you can see that's about as far as my brain goes, is that there's a T shape in the middle and the wings split. So here's a good example of, I should always do my research. I should be looking at something, even if it's a brief glance at it. And I can see that I was kind of close, but not really. So that's a very good example of why you always work from reference, because I was already going down a path that I shouldn't have. So I was close, but you know, horseshoes and hand grenades and all that stuff. So this should be a little bit stubbier. And this should be more of a Y shape in the middle. So that makes a big difference just to have some reference to look at. So he's got his big gold chain medallion. Why not? It's typically like what you should be taking into battle, right? Is big pieces of bling. So the other thing that I'm going to do before I start inking this, finish the Siamese stuff here. So I have to add those shapes on the head. Yep, scarab medallion. We had some Egyptian references earlier, so we can mix a little bit of that stuff in there. So I'm just making sure that I add the shapes in there so I can define those colors. So I think that'll be good for now. So that'll be good enough to define the shapes. I probably need to give this guy a tail, huh? And here's the other thing that I probably should be doing is, again, looking at reference. So I have my Siamese cat there. I can't really see what the tail shape is in that particular picture, so I'm going to do another quick search to see if I can find what a Siamese cat tail looks like, because, you know, some of them are bushy, some of them are just, you know, skinny and normal. This doesn't look like anything super crazy. Looks like it's about the same thickness all the way down. It does taper at the end a little bit. And again, you can see that I was already doing this wrong, because if I was going to continue in what I was doing here, it was actually going to come out and get bigger at the end, which is not really accurate. And you know, this is a stylized character, so it doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but you know, that could, you know, like with the beetle thing, I could be a little bit off, or I could be really off, and I might miss one of those cues that would make you think, oh, this is a Siamese cat. So what I can do here instead is, this should probably be the same thickness almost all the way through, and then it starts tapering at the end. So as it wraps around here, and remember, the overall style is still kind of chunky and thick and solid, so I want to make sure that I don't get too thin on there, and I keep everything nice and rounded. And I'm kind of drawing through this here to make sure my lines line up here. All right, so there's the tail in place, and I can erase some of those lines so I don't mess up those when I'm going through the inking process. I think I do want to give this guy some kind of lightweight sash around him a little bit. So really just kind of an upper cover that kind of goes around his neck and shoulders. So right now I'm just kind of drawing some directional lines from where this is going to wrap. I'm not even really making any definitive lines of what's going on here yet. I just know I want some kind of cloth to be going around here. almost like a sash or something. And I need to make sure I follow the curve of his shoulder, which I'm currently not back here. It's actually a little too high, so I'm going to bring that down a little bit. The only other thing I think I need to fix are these terrible swords, the perspective on these that make it look like it's broken. So I think I'm definitely going to take a look at that because those are not in good shape currently. So especially the one in his left hand, that's looking pretty rough. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at that. So I'm going to use this, since I went ahead and did the work for it, I'm going to go ahead and use those as kind of guides for fixing the perspective on that sword. So I already kind of made that that box in perspective to follow. So I'm just going to go ahead and do my quick measurements on there. It actually doesn't look too bad at the top here. And even at the bottom, like the actual blade doesn't look too bad to match the perspective, and it does have that little bit of a curve in there. I think it was really just the handle that was really far off. I do need to make the point go to the very top of where this goes. And I need to make sure that the distance between the point and this curve here is pretty close, so it looks like I need to bring that up a little higher. And this line would go down straight here a little bit more. Oops. So that's a little more accurate. And this hand is kind of a jumbled mess though. So I might have to fix that before I would go into doing any kind of inking work, because that's kind of really tough to see what's going on there. So again, here's a very quick tip to do hands for this. So there could be a trick to make this look like a hand at first, but you can see like I have a line coming out here. That's the direction of the arm. So what I'm going to do is I should have parallel lines coming off of that here in this way, and then here would be a box for my hand essentially, and in the center of that's where the handle of the sword would go down through. So that would help put some basic perspective on this. And then we would have either 3 or 4 fingers. Now I can't remember from how I did the previous guy. So again, let me take a look at my heroes that I currently have done. I think they do have... Yeah, hands are the bane of everyone's existence, Biku. I can tell you that for sure. So don't feel bad. This has actually helped me a lot to break these down into shapes like this. So this box here, I can run these basic lines around, and then that would be my fingers wrapping around. They probably wouldn't go all the way back to the end of the hand. They would probably only wrap to about here. So that'd be a really simple way to get that shape in there. And obviously they're all not the same length, but we're just trying to rough out basic shapes so it kind of looks okay in space. But so you have your hand here, which we've kind of made the box for, and then we basically make another box of fingers on top of that. But in this case, they're actually wrapped around the handle. But at the base, you ever seen your hands? There's kind of almost two spheres there, and then you have another cylinder that comes off of that for a thumb. So I need to make sure that in my three-dimensional space here, that I have a cylinder, or excuse me, two spheres here that are kind of squished, and they're actually in behind here. They kind of go through it. And a cylinder, it's actually a couple cylinders, one that goes out and one that bends. So I need a cylinder that comes off of there and then kind of wraps over top of the fingers. And there's no real shame in looking at your hands while you're doing this. You know, that helps out a lot to figure out, okay, where's this supposed to go? So then I'm going to put a little more effort into these. Now they're not a perfect box as it goes all the way down. If you do some studies on hands, you'll know that the knuckles at the top, if you take a look at your hand, they actually stick out higher on the side. So as it goes down to your pinky, it actually will have a tapering shape. It's not really a box. So you have here, it actually will taper inward. So the knuckle out here is bigger, and then they actually taper in as they get smaller. So I'm going to make sure that I take that into consideration a little bit. And again, like, this is super stylized, and that is definitely the wrong color. So let's go ahead and pick my other color back there. So I'm going to make sure I put the points here for where the knuckles are, which if I'm drawing this as a thick object here, an actual cylinder kind of in space, my knuckles can't go over here. They have to be above the handle there. They're not going to go inside of it. So you can see it's kind of sloppy, but it's kind of getting there. And then here's the next part of the knuckle. And I'm going to go refer back to my heroes again. And Dark Leaf. Let me see here. Yeah, I didn't just see how I did the hands on him. So Dark Leaf had gloves on. I was wondering if I had put any type of cat claws or anything on this guy, but I didn't. He had a glove on, so I kind of have free reign to figure out what's going to make sense for this particular world. And I guess just to double check, I guess I do have, Dark Leaf has bare feet, and I have some little claws that aren't quite out yet. So that kind of gives me a little bit of a reference for what I can do here. Yeah, and if anybody wants to see anything else on here, or if have any questions about what I'm working on, what I'm doing, you feel free to ask. So again, this character is Mal Ragwan. We picked him at the beginning. He's a Fenrir warrior, which is a cat race warrior. He is one of the strongest fighters that you can get in the game. And we picked a handful of things that you guys pointed out, like the Siamese cat. We did an Egyptian-style beetle medallion, the double swords, kind of scimitar shape. So I think we got something to work on here. I might put something interesting here at the bottom of the sword here. This actually might be a good opportunity to keep that theme going, like we have that medallion. Maybe we can do something with that down here at the base of the sword. Maybe we kind of repeat that same shape. We're going to lose a lot of detail. And just to make sure I do this right here so I don't have to redo it. Here's an example of how I can use that in perspective. You know, I have these lines coming down in a straight line through here. I already kind of established the lines for, you can see here, this line here for the sword is where these parallel lines would go through. So I need to carry that down here into the base. And so I have those lines, the plane for the blade. Then I basically make these planes for the medallion as well that I'm going to put at the base. And I can round that off. And then I get something that's pretty close to what I need it to be down here at the base of this. Get rid of all my construction lines. And I don't usually put this back in, the cross lines in there, just so I remember. And I'm going to just follow that around and give it a little bit of thickness. And I would do exactly the same thing over on the other side. So I've already established my main line that goes through here. And I also have established this line here for perspective. So I would just keep those lines going and making sure that all those are kind of parallel. And then I'm going to cut that in half. I can draw my circle, and then I'll cut off all the extra that I don't need. Probably looks like I need to fix this hand up a little bit before I go too much farther. So I'm doing, you can do a box or a sphere for the hands. I can get away with doing a sphere because I'm doing that a little bit longer, so I can kind of cheat a little bit. And again, these taper as they go down, so the pinky knuckles here should be a little bit closer. Actually, the middle finger should be the furthest one out. And if I'm doing that, I also need to put my thumb down here so it's wrapping around. And you can see I have a nice cylinder that's coming down this way. These kind of are parallel lines. So, but I need to follow the curve of this cylinder if I'm going to give him something like wristbands that go up here. Like I need to follow those around. I'm going to add a little more detail in his feet here just because I had it in the other cat character. And I think that's probably going to be good for this guy. I probably am going to add a little more detail to his swords, but I don't know that I need to do that in this particular view of the sketch. I can probably do that while I'm putting in some of the ink work and just kind of have fun with it. Because one of the styles for this game is there's a lot of kind of hand-drawn on-the-fly patterns. So what I'm going to do here is really lighten this up. And I'm going to match my ink lines here. I was actually using a brush pack that I got for free. Somebody was giving one away on DeviantArt. So they had a really cool pack that emulated HB pencils and colored pencils. So I can put a link in the video after I'm done. These are really cool because it makes it really feel like that you're using real media, which kind of helps. But right now I'm actually going to go back to just a general solid brush to do my ink lines, because part of this style that I'm doing here, part of the style that I'm doing here is matching that kind of early Dragon Ball, Dragon Quest style where it's very thin lines. They're the same width all the way around. They don't get thin and thick. The other thing that I'm probably going to turn off is pen pressure. I just need to do thin lines. So right now I'm just at this size making sure that I'm just getting my pen width the same. Because I actually drew this on a different program, so I want to make sure that I'm just getting my pen thickness exactly the same to match so that the artwork looks the same. I think that's about as close as I'm going to get here. It should work. So I'm just using a hard round brush. So this would be basically like if I was using like a Pigma micro pen, one of those with the felt tip fine pens. So I actually used to use, I did some comic book art back in the day, and that's what I actually used. So I'm going to make a new layer for my ink. And I'm going to get a lot closer because I'm going to start adding a little more detail. So I'm just going to go and get as close as I can to this drawing here, but I need to pay a little more attention to where things are going. Obviously these lines don't have to be final. I can go at any point and adjust these. So the one distinguishing trait of this particular art style is that all the colors are usually separated by lines. So even though this face is shaded, I'm actually going to draw an outline around the colors here. So like this is actually just the dark color, so that'll get shaded in. Even though it's color change, the art style that I chose, I would just draw a box around the whole color change. And you'll see that in probably another video, I'm guessing. We'll probably finish up Raoul in the next video and get started on some other stuff. There's tons of stuff to do, so I'll have you guys pick next time, and maybe I'll post some things on social media and you guys can figure out what we want to draw. There's a bunch of relics to draw from the game, characters, environments, all kinds of stuff that we can all weigh in on and see what would be cool. I'm still getting used to the tablet because I haven't done really a lot of drawings with this. Ooh, that was kind of rough. I'm zoomed in pretty far, so I have to draw a pretty long straight line across the 20-inch monitor, so I'm gonna have to get used to that. Yeah, so Red Fox is asking, I talked about how important reference can be for your art, and worked from a few examples. Do I do the same thing to come up with races, cultures, histories? Yeah, for the most part. I actually didn't do a lot of homework on this particular race, but some of the other things I do and I have. I have another game that I did tons of research on. Um, for it's a lot of it is like a mix between World War II and kind of hot rod stuff. So there was a lot of mixing up and a lot of references for how to make that stuff work. So for these guys here, um, I do have some references for what I wanted to do for Japanese culture and a few things for like some of the buildings and things, which I haven't even started yet, but I did collect that info and I was kind of started to build that world. Uh, so that's kind of where I do like to do my homework and kind of mash things up and see what works. But it also, I'm trying to make it into a functional world as well. And that's some of the stuff that we're going to cover on here is the whole culture of this initial town that you get to explore and this initial island that you get to explore in the game. It's kind of a seafaring mining culture. So they have it's a port culture. It's right on the ocean. So I'm going to do a lot of references for historical things like um, what older port towns looked like, what kind of jobs were there, what kind of people would be there, and then also like mixing in that mining and stuff. So I'm going to go look at like really old school like mining culture and things like that and work into like, well, what kind of living conditions, what kind of houses, what kind of, and then take a little bit of a spin and throw all of these other things that are in this world in there. Like you'll see this one pattern that keeps showing up a lot, which is this kind of hand-drawn, I kind of call it fantasy paisley, for lack of a better word. It's kind of this hand-drawn thing. And you can see that a little bit actually on Braxos, which kind of has all this kind of ornate, swirly stuff going on. You'll see that as a repeating pattern across a lot. In this particular culture, it's kind of very ornate. And I was going to work some of that into the engravings on the sword here. That's a great question about the references. We as humans kind of repeat stuff a lot, right? Like, so it actually helps to borrow from history when you're doing some of these things. If you notice, a very good example, actually, if you guys watched Rogue One, that whole scene when they were down on the planet, that was basically Normandy Beach in World War II. Like, that's all iconic stuff that you can go back in history, and they pulled on a lot of that stuff. It was if you had all that technology, you would not have fought that war that way. It would just doesn't make any sense. But from our vantage point, it makes sense because we understand that. So yeah, it actually helps a lot to go back and reference cultures and histories and things that we do understand, and weave that in because that stuff becomes ingrained in our culture as far as how stuff goes. And it's that can be dangerous, right? Because you don't want to remember something inaccurately, but it's also a good way to recast a lens on something as well and draw attention to it, and bring new light to it and maybe tell the story in a different way or from a different perspective. You'll definitely see when I get into the building design for the city and a few other things. Even when I get into some creature design, I'll probably start pulling in reference images from lots of different creatures, start mixing things up, and doing exactly kind of what we did there, finding themes about what makes a creature and what's cool about it, and pulling different elements from whatever needs to happen. If we need a really powerful animal, we go find powerful animal references and take some of those cool things, and then kind of mix things together. I'm zoomed in pretty far here, so um, this stuff doesn't really have to be that perfect when I'm zoomed in. I also learned not to be super precious about some of this line work because, where it may not be super fancy at this far away, the character is probably going to be like that big. So, you know, if it looks decent at this size, then obviously it's going to look fantastic when I shrink this down to about an eighth of the size for the actual game. So yeah, Red Fox is asking, and that sounds really interesting. Will that stuff be on the stream? I'm assuming you're talking about the races and cultures and all that stuff, or a character design. Yeah, that's actually what this channel is going to be for, is talking through how this stuff gets built, why I'm doing it, and how to build a game world, really. Like all of these cultures, all of these races, items, like how it gets all put together. And I'm not really giving away a secret sauce or anything. Like, this is just kind of a process that I go through. There's no way to cheat it. There's no way to just magically make it happen. You have to go find the reference. You have to go do the homework. So, but you'll get to see the process. You'll learn some tips and tricks, and Whoops. Got used to drawing my iPad. I'm trying to do the two fingers squish to pinch and zoom, and that doesn't work on this. At least I'm not trying to pinch and zoom on my regular drawing pad like I had before with regular pen and paper. I caught myself trying to do that one time. It's kind of embarrassing when I'm trying to zoom in on my actual piece of paper. Yeah, luckily I have autosave on, but um, I'm going to do that just because you said so. Yeah, save often. So if you have anything you guys want to see for next time, there's a ton of artwork to do for the game. There's environments, creatures, weapons, armor, all kinds of other crazy stuff. There's cities that need made. There's a whole bunch of stuff like that. So if there's any of that stuff that sounds interesting, I can put it on the docket for next time, and I might be able to put some things on social media and have you guys do some voting and see what you guys want to come up with. We still do have our other characters that we can mess around with, so it's kind of whatever you guys are interested in, we can start doing. Doesn't have to be just characters. I just wanted to start it off with characters this time, because I have 70 characters to draw, I think. So environments, yeah, that's actually my weakness. So it'll be good for me to beef up on that a little bit. Not some really cool stuff in this world. So there's a few things in the world that there's a lot of history. There's like a race of like massive giants that lived in the world before. So there's all these crazy environments that are huge. There's these statues that are like massive that are just out in the middle of nowhere that are kind of half buried. So like there's some cool stuff like that with that I'm going to mess around with scale that I think should be really interesting. Yeah, BQ, if you have challenges with perspective, unfortunately, environment is all perspective. So that's why it's hard for me, because perspective is hard no matter what you do. But like that's pretty much all you need to do is draw perspective lines. So that can be a real challenge for sure. So here's where I'm going to start doing some of the freehand swirlies here. There's my fantasy paisley. And I'm probably going to be wrapping up here tonight. Um, so let me know if you guys want me to finish the coloring on this. I mean, obviously, I don't need to show you the rest of the inking process here. But I can do finish the coloring on this guy, so you can see how I do the coloring, shadows, and highlights on this particular style, if you guys are interested in that. If you're not, we can skip and move on to something else. There's plenty of things to do to build this particular game world. So lots of environment, like I said, objects to design, um, all kinds of stuff like that. So we can move on to other characters. You talking about you want to see a little bit of the coloring? Yeah, we can definitely do that. Maybe I'll go ahead and finish inking this guy, and then it really, once I get this done, it will only take maybe I want to say 10 or 15 minutes probably to get just the base color on, and maybe another 10 or 15 minutes to finish it up. The coloring actually is really fast. Like this is all the hard work, is to figuring out where the shapes go, make sure the lines are correct. So I'll go ahead and end it here, and then we can pick this up next time. I'll go ahead and finish the inking on this, and then we'll go ahead and start on the coloring process so you can see how I kind of do that. I mean, I kind of broke that down a little bit for you, at least the line work and the sketching on the Braxos character, but this will give you a really good feel for how I do the shading and everything on there. So I really want to thank you guys for stopping by. There's a lot of good comments, a lot of good feedback there, and I'll be asking a lot to see what you guys want to have in this. Obviously, a lot of this stuff came from you guys. It was, the Siamese cat, the Egyptian beetle stuff, scimitars, cat people, so I want to appreciate you guys helping me build this stuff, because this is all going to make it into the game, so I appreciate it. And whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Be creative, share all this stuff with each other, and let's help each other make cool stuff. All right, thanks for tuning in, guys. I appreciate it.